July 1944. A prisoner of war camp deep in the heart of Texas. The air here was heavy, saturated with the scent of dry grass, scorched sand, and an unbearable, almost physical anticipation of the end. For thousands of German soldiers held in these enclosures amidst the endless American prairie, life had turned into an infinite vigil. Most of them had survived the meat grinder of the Eastern Front, witnessed the death of their comrades in the snow-covered steppes near Stalingrad or in the marshes of Belarus. In their minds, the world was rigidly structured. There was the front, where every day was a struggle for physical survival, and there was the home front, an abstract concept that was supposed to sacrifice everything to sustain the war machine. Nazi propaganda had hammered a single thought into their heads for years. America was a starving giant on feet of clay, a country torn apart by strikes, the rot of capitalism, and total shortages. They were told that the American people were cowardly merchants who ate ersatz products, and that their government was hiding a catastrophe from its own population to maintain the illusion of prosperity. Hans, a private in the 352nd Infantry Division, who was captured after the Allied landing in Normandy, still remembered the taste of his last meal in Germany. It was a piece of black, bitter ersatz bread that resembled compressed sawdust more than food, and a watery, murky soup that provided no sustenance, only a heavy weight in his stomach. Hans was absolutely convinced it would be much worse in America. He expected to be met here with hatred, starvation, and humiliation as retribution for the crimes they had committed. He was internally prepared for this. He expected abuse. He expected a cruel primal struggle for every tiny morsel he could manage to swallow. But when he first found himself by the trash bins behind the camp kitchen, the world view he had built over the years began to crumble, not in a philosophical sense, but in the most grounded and physiological way imaginable, through his stomach. He was not just surprised, he was shocked. It was incomprehensible to him that a country waging a world war could afford such luxury. There was none of the oppressive atmosphere of fear that permeated life in Germany in 1944. Here, the guards behaved not like wardens, but like ordinary workers for whom the job was simply an unpleasant routine. Hans looked at them, at their smooth, well-fed faces, their sturdy boots, their way of moving. There was no fanaticism in their demeanor. There was only the confidence of men who knew victory was already in their pocket. This contrast between what the propagandists had promised and what they saw with their own eyes was the beginning of a long and agonizing awakening for Hans. He began to realize that the entire powerful ideological structure for which he had spilled his blood was merely a cardboard set, hiding the cold and unsightly reality of defeat. It happened at noon, when the camp was immersed in a lazy post-lunch silence. Hans, whose duties included cleaning the area around the kitchen, passed the massive containers. At that moment, the wind carried a scent that made his head spin. The thick, enveloping aroma of hot coffee, fried meat, and something sweet, like vanilla. It was the scent of a well-fed, self-confident civilization that did not even suspect the existence of shortages. By the trash bin, he saw an American guard. The man was relaxed, humming a tune while holding a tin of beef stew. It seemed that something had gone wrong while trying to open it. The lid was jammed, the can was dented, or perhaps the guard had simply changed his mind, deciding he wanted something else. With a casual, almost demonstrative motion, he tossed the can into the trash bin, right on top of potato peelings, bread crusts, and vegetable scraps. Hans froze as if struck by a bolt of lightning. His eyes widened to the limit, his breath hitched. In Germany in 1944, one could sell their life for a single can like that. People sold their last belongings, family heirlooms, and betrayed their convictions just to get a piece of real meat. Hans instinctively stepped forward, forgetting all the strict prohibitions, the guards, and the fear of being shot. His fingers, trembling with uncontrollable wild excitement, dug into the cold, greasy metal of the can. He fished it out of the trash, clutching it to his chest as if it were a precious artifact capable of saving him from starvation. He did not look at the guard. He looked only at the label, at the grease spots left on the lid, inhaling the scent that was more precious to him than life itself. He was fully prepared for a sharp blow from a rifle butt to his stomach. He was prepared to be grabbed, thrown into the dust, accused of theft, and sent to a solitary cell with nothing but bread and water. The American guard, watching this scene, paused for a moment. His face did not express anger, but rather disgust mixed with deep, genuine bewilderment. He looked at Hans, at his dirty, grimy uniform, at his gaunt, sunken face, at how he clutched the trash to himself as if it were his only salvation in the world. The guard sighed heavily, spat to the side, and walked over to a stack of crates standing near the kitchen door. He took a new, perfect, shining can of stew, exactly like the one in Hans's hands, only not dented, and carelessly tossed it to the German. Hans caught it in flight, nearly dropping it. The guard said only one short, mundane phrase that caused something inside Hans to snap. "Hey, buddy, don't eat out of the trash. That's not hygienic. Take a good one." Hans stood like a statue, looking from the old dirty can in the trash to the new, full one in his hand. At that moment, a mechanism clicked inside his brain. The guard was not the cruel Yankee from his nightmares. He was an ordinary man for whom beef stew was a mundane, accessible commodity. At that moment, reality collided with his ideology and trampled it into the dust. Hans returned to the barracks, but he did not open the can immediately. He sat on his bunk, staring at it as if it were a miracle that had revealed a terrible truth to him. His barrack mates surrounded him, silently looking at the label, at the American logo, at this consumer paradise that was now available to them for free. That night in the barracks, no one spoke of the Reich's victory. No one discussed the Führer's orders or the greatness of the German spirit. They sat in silence, digesting what they had seen. It was the end of their ideological war. They realized they were not just fighting an army, but a civilization for which their shortages, their suffering, and their great sacrifices were something wild, barbaric, and incomprehensible. An American soldier could throw food away because he had such a surplus that he simply stopped valuing it. A German soldier was ready to kill for that food because there was none at all. In this inequality, there was not just an economic difference. There was an insurmountable moral and civilizational chasm. Hans understood. While they marched across Europe to the sounds of anthems about world domination, the Americans were building a conveyor belt that could feed the planet. Later, working on American farms, they saw the farmers' houses. Everyone had a car, a radio, electricity, running water, and a refrigerator. Their world, consisting of endless marches, fear, and sleeping in the mud, collided with a world where a person was valued above ideology. They saw Sears catalogs featuring hundreds of types of clothing, tools, home appliances, and even toys. They could not believe that a country waging a world war could afford such a level of consumption. To them, this catalog was proof. They have so many things they don't even know what to do with them. This birthed a bitter, heavy understanding. Propaganda had been building castles in the air on a foundation of lies for years. Instead of a decaying capitalist society, they had encountered a powerful, well-fed, and incredibly organized nation whose resources seemed infinite. American authorities used this psychological factor consciously, turning prisoners into witnesses of their superiority. A well-fed and calm prisoner is a man who will not riot. This strategy worked flawlessly. Gradually, the atmosphere in the camps began to change. German soldiers who had been ready to die for the Führer just yesterday now discussed not frontline successes, but how efficiently American combines worked, how well thought out the food supply logistics were, and why their industry had proven so much more effective than the German one. They saw that American soldiers ate better than generals of the Wehrmacht. This gastronomic shock became their primary proof of defeat long before the act of capitulation was signed. They began to realize that their country had lost not because of its generals or strategy. It had lost because they had chosen the path of destruction, while their opponent had chosen the path of creation and abundance. Each meal in the camp became a kind of enlightenment for them, sobering their consciousness from the haze of ideology. They began to understand that their enemy was not just stronger. He lived in a different reality, in a world where creation was valued above destruction. This realization became the most bitter lesson of their lives, one they received not in Abwehr schools, but in the cafeteria of an American POW camp. When the war ended and the prisoners began to return to a ruined Germany, they brought with them stories of the American all-you-can-eat buffet that sounded to their half-starved countrymen like fairy tales from another dimension. Every returning prisoner was a carrier of the truth virus that undermined faith in the greatness of the Reich. They saw that the American model of society had been capable of providing a life that people in the Europe of the 1940s could only dream of. It was a final, most painful realization. Their ideology was built on hatred and destruction, while the enemy's ideology was built on abundance and creation. In the end, it was a victory of reality over a mirage that left the taste of that same American white bread in their souls forever. The bitter taste of the truth they had to swallow after realizing the meaninglessness of their sacrifices. The operation to maintain prisoners of war in the United States became one of the most successful examples of psychological warfare in history. The Americans, without even realizing it, turned their camps into grounds for re-education through reality. There was no need to hold long lectures on the evils of Nazism. It was enough to show a German soldier how an ordinary American worker lived. It was a victory without a single shot, a victory where the decisive argument was a simple meal. When the war ended, America emerged not only as a military victor, but as the bearer of a lifestyle that became the envy of millions. German soldiers who went through this experience were the first to begin destroying the myth of Nazi superiority from within. For them, a plate of food became a symbol of the collapse of everything they had been ready to die for, but which had turned out to be just a beautiful set piece. They understood they had lost not only because the U.S. had more tanks, but because the American system had proven capable of ensuring social stability and well-being even under global war conditions. This lesson remained tied to their memory of America forever. They had fought against a shadow, only to be crushed by the light of industrial power. And today, looking back, One can say that this very factor, the ability of the U.S. to show its power through peaceful life, made their victory so complete and final. Those prisoners who returned home brought with them not only memories of the camps, but seeds of doubt in Nazi ideology, which eventually bore fruit in the reconstruction of a new Germany. It was a victory of reason over fanaticism, a victory of the system over anarchy. Everyone who passed through American captivity took with them the knowledge that reality will always be stronger than any fiction, no matter how beautiful it might seem in the offices of dictators. Operation Pastorius or other German sabotage plans paled in comparison to this simple, mundane demonstration of the American standard of living. The story of German prisoners in the U.S. is a story of how madness meets discipline and how reality prevails over any ideology. And it was precisely this that made that victory possible: the ability of every part of American society to work for the common cause, defending their way of life from any encroachment, even if that encroachment came from the very darkness of night. It was the finale of the war, written not only on the battlefields, but in the mess halls of the camps, where soldiers learned to realize that the world was far more complex and powerful than their leaders had promised them. They left the camps for home, forever preserving in their memory that bitter taste of truth which they could not swallow along with Nazi propaganda.